Graham, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Lenny. I'm super excited to be here.
Okay, so you are ostensibly a professor at Stanford Graduate School of Business of a class called Managing Growing Enterprises. But I was reading an interview with you, and you shared that when people come ask you for advice, they're not asking, how do I start a company? How do I manage my growing enterprise? How do I make my company grow faster? Most of the questions, the most common question you get, which is surprising to me, is what should I do with my life? First of all, is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. About half of all the times I meet with students, that's the question they ask. It's really funny too, because sometimes they'll come with a PowerPoint presentation and a 2x2 matrix and an expected value and all that. But really they're asking the question of, hey, what should I do with my life? Which is, by the way, a great question.
Why do you think that's the case? That's not what I would imagine someone at an MBA school in a business class asking for advice on.
My typical meeting with a student will say, the student will start to tell me about these 2 or 3 different career or job alternatives that they have, A, B, and C. Let's just use 2, A and B. And then they go through and they start talking about A, and they tell me all the pros and the cons of A, and they go through it. And then they go through B and they start telling me all those things. And I start asking some questions. And after about 5 or 10 minutes into that, I can tell that their heart and their soul and their energy is really for B. That's really what they want, but they're talking themselves out of B and they're going to talk themselves into A. And so what I try to do is I try to let them realize that their real energy is for B. Just let them feel that and understand that. And then secondly, I try to figure out what are the limiting beliefs they have. What are the fears? What are the obstacles? What are the voices in their head? What are all the societal pressures that are keeping them from doing B? And then we try to deconstruct those and get them to go do B. So that's the process.
Is there an example of a student going, like just this actual conversation you had with someone?
Absolutely. So there's a great example of a student of mine was from Brazil, and he came in and was his prior job prior to business schools, he worked in consulting, and that was more or less what he wanted to do. And then at some point I asked the students, okay, imagine you knew you were going to be successful and you were going to have a dream, and whatever you dreamed was going to come true. What would you dream for? And he wanted to start a nonprofit in his home country of Brazil to help students have more access to education. That was what came up for him. And over the course of our class, we just chipped away at all the fears and limiting beliefs of why he shouldn't or couldn't do that. And by the end, that's what he did. And that's a real life example. And there's all kinds of other examples. But that second one of going and starting a charity, it's not on the beaten path. It's not what your parents are thinking you should do. There's probably 100 reasons not to do it. You probably don't know exactly how to start. And so it's intimidating. But if you start with this idea, hey, 5 years out, 10 years out, I know I'm going to be successful, and work backwards from that, you're going to come up with a better answer.
This is a framework that you call the Genie methodology, of the Genie framework. This question that you just asked that we should spend more time on, which is, I guess you tell the story of the Genie and how to think about this.
When I was 13 years old, I used to listen to these motivational tapes mowing lawns, and I'm pretty sure it was Brian Tracy had this exercise, and he said, okay, and I've adapted it. So I'll use my exercise now. So I say, basically, imagine that, you're walking home from work and you see this bright shiny object. You walk over and you realize it's a magic lamp, and you rub the lamp, and this genie comes out, and the genie says, hey, I haven't been in this bottle for 10,000 years yet, so I'm not fully formed, so I can't give you 3 wishes, but what I can do is I can give you 1 wish, and the wish I can give you is whatever you throw yourself into with your whole life and your career, it's going to turn out great. It's going to work out great. It's probably going to take longer than you think. It's going to be harder than you think, but you're going to be really happy you did, and it's going to work out beyond your wildest imagination. If that were true and you had that genie blessing you with that wish, what would you wish for? And then the students come up with an answer that's really close to their heart and it's the thing they would do absent the fear of failure. And then the second part of the exercise is basically, that's what you should go do. that you should be spending your life in pursuit of your genie goal. Maybe you can't start that tomorrow. You have financial obligations. Maybe there's some experience you need. But at some point in this one life we get, you want to get yourself on that path of that journey. And that's the exercise that I go through with the students.
It's such a simple idea that I can totally see how it could be so powerful. And I love the way it's framed as not like, it'll guarantee you'll be successful. It's instead, I'll guarantee you'll be happy.
You'll be happy that you took the path. And the reason I say that is that, like, there's usually the genie goal is the not well-trodden path. So you don't even know exactly what the goal is. Like this charity to start education for underprivileged kids in Brazil, like that takes its own form over the course of a decade, and it will almost certainly turn out differently than you think. So it's more that you'll be really happy you went and started that journey, and it will go great. It will probably go differently and take longer than you think, though.
What are some other examples of genie goals folks have followed that are kind of non-traditional and they've ended up being happy about it?
I mean, mine was, buying companies in my dorm room at business school. I have a student who's starting an amusement park in Texas. That's a pretty crazy example. Many students who are leaving their job and doing startups. A lot of students who are going in the nonprofit world. So really, just lots of examples. It's as variant as the number of students I have, and that's the magic of it, because you have inside of you some really unique dream that you maybe haven't even shared, and the goal is that's your uniqueness, and that's what you should be bringing into this world.
This whole exercise connects to something that you're a big advocate of this idea of getting out of autopilot mode in your life. And the way I think about it is like people, and I'm going to ask you to describe it, but just like it's almost like you're driving and you've never turned off the cruise control in your car and you don't realize it. Talk about this idea that most of us are in autopilot and why it's so important to realize that and get out of it.
You start off and you're unconscious and you're kind of going through the motions, and you may not even realize why you're doing what you're doing or even realize what you're doing. So for example, a typical person gets up, they have whatever their morning routine. I'll use myself. I drive in, I get up, work out, take a shower, drive into work, fight traffic, commute. I'm late. I get in, I'm late to a meeting. I'm kind of rushed, meeting, okay, quick break for lunch. Maybe I return some emails, a few more meetings, a couple Zoom calls, fight traffic on the way home, rush through dinner, get back on email, go to bed. Okay, that's my day. And that's a busy day. I felt like I did a lot. I'm exhausted. But it's unconscious. It's not a day that is intentional. It's not a day where I've said, where do I want to be going with my life? What's important to me in this world? What are my values? What 10 years from now will I wish I was starting to embark on? Adding that level of intentionality and then working backwards from that is really the magic of getting to that 10 years from now and looking back without regret, and getting to a later point in your life and feeling like you're doing the thing you're put on this earth to do, as opposed to just kind of going through the motions.
So the question then here is, how do you get out of that autopilot mode? Because it's, first of all, no one really realizes this is the case. And I'll tell a quick story. We're going to different preschools and daycares for our son. He's a year and a half oldish. And we went to this Montessori school, and the teacher's like, what we're doing here, I'm going to be very clear. What we're doing here is informing your child's subconscious. That's what they're learning here. And that's a huge responsibility. We put a lot of love into that idea, but it's very important you understand that's what we do at the school. And I never thought of it that way.
That's amazing that they said that. So you just opened up another part of this, which is, depending on what research you see, you read, somewhere between 95 and 98% of our thoughts are subconscious. And those get programmed in somehow, some way. A big part of that, by the way, is media, our friends, our parents, our boss, our coworkers, what we think we're supposed to do, social media, this is cool, buy this Ferrari, all these different things. And then you're just operating out of that. And so the idea of being intentional is create space, get out of that, get out of the fog of war, make some space. I do it. We'll probably get to this in a little bit, but I do it with an executive coach and really ask deep questions. Make space, ask questions, create the intention that you want in each of the areas of your life, and then start having your calendar reflect that intention.
And so this genie exercise is one approach, is just ask yourself this question. Can you say it again just for folks so they don't miss it? What's the question you should ask yourself?
I mean, the biggest question, I think, with respect to your career is, within reason, what would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? That's the biggest question. I'll give you a few more if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
These are some other ones that some different questions trigger different things with people that could be helpful. Trigger in a good way. I mean, so for example, here's a few more. If you didn't have to make money, what would you do? And that'll answer, kind of what you enjoy. Naval Ravikant has a great question, which is, what's play for you that is work for other people? So, for you, Lenny, that might be a podcast. That might be play for you. That's really fun. You're always going to do better at that. You're going to spend more time. You're going to enjoy it more. That's a good one. Another one is, what's the thing you really want to do, but you're just too embarrassed to say it? And my answer to this question was that I wanted to be a motivational speaker like Tony Robbins, and I was super embarrassed to say that, but that actually works into a lot of my life at this point. Another question, who are some people that you admire and want to be more like, and what do they do? And where are some of those, where do you find those people? What are some things you want to learn, and how do you want to grow over the next 5-10 years? So I know a lot of your listeners are working in tech, so what 5-10 years from now, you're amazing, you're best in the world at X. What's X? And how do you start to work toward becoming great at X? So there's a few more other questions you could throw in to help you figure out some things you're excited about.
You mentioned this idea of limiting beliefs, and I think a lot of people listening to this are probably having these beliefs right now of, okay, but I have a family to support. I'm not going to go start a charity in Brazil. That's absurd. It sounds easy, but I can't actually change my life this radically.
Yep.
Can you just share something to help people get past that in some way?
Sure. The first thing I would say about limiting beliefs is they're the most powerful and the most dangerous when you don't even know what they are. So when they're in the recesses of your subconscious mind, that is 95% of your thoughts, that's when the limiting beliefs are the most dangerous. So a simple example might just be like, I have a limiting belief that I'm not funny, and it's in my subconscious, and I don't even realize I have it. So I avoid things where I'm, trying to be funny or tell jokes. I mean, that's a silly example, but let's use your career now and come up with some maybe deeper ones. Let's use that charity example, the Brazilian charity. I'm going to start a Brazilian charity. What are the limiting beliefs? Well, oh my gosh, there's a million. I don't know how to start. I don't know how I would pay for myself. I have business school debt. I don't really know what I'm even talking about. I don't even have a plan for it. How would I get funding? Those are all these things that are flooding your mind. So the first exercise is just write all that down. Just get it down on paper. And then two things will happen. One is when you get it down on paper, it will almost immediately strip that limiting belief of a lot of its power and a lot of its scariness. Because now it's just something like, for example, how would I fund this? So the second thing that is that a lot of that scariness becomes just a to-do item. So you're in the recesses of your subconscious, that is a very scary limiting belief that will actually keep you from doing the thing you love. Once it's on paper, now it's just a to-do item that you can actually deal with your conscious mind, just like you do anything else. So how would I how would I fund this just becomes a plan. Like I need to design a plan where I'd get funding for this charity. And then that just is a problem like any other problem. It's not this nebulous, scary fear. It's just literally a to-do item. And so the first part of limiting beliefs, write them down, understand what they are, look at them in the cold day of light on paper, and then translate them into things that are just obstacles to be overcome. And by the way, if you're listening to this podcast, you've overcome millions of obstacles in your life, and these are no different once they're down on paper.
Are you actually doing these exercises with your students? Like they're taking a class about growing their enterprise, and then it's like, okay, let's analyze what you want to do with your life. Is that how this class goes?
That's a really good question. So I'll give you a little bit of background. So I was a case guest at Stanford Business School while I was buying companies in my dorm room, and it was talking about all the things that went wrong. And so it's kind of a really fun case. And I did that for 12 years. And I started to realize that was like my most energetic day of the year. And so long story short, I started teaching a class full time. So I did that for 4 years, and I was teaching the X's and O's of being a CEO, basically hiring, firing, having hard conversations, managing a board, fundraising, selling, all the things you would imagine that young CEO would need to know. After about 4 years, I started to realize that was great, except that no one went and did it. So the class is on entrepreneurship, and they learned how to be an entrepreneur. They did there's only one problem. They didn't actually become entrepreneurs. So then I said, well, wait a sec. I have to readjust my class a little bit, and I have to spend some time on the stuff we've just been talking about, finding out what your dream is, your limiting beliefs, starting to map out goals toward your actual entrepreneurship dream or whatever your genie goal is. So the way I say it is the university allows me to teach the class because I teach them entrepreneurial tricks, tactics, tools that will help them become a great CEO. But the real reason I teach is because I'm trying to help people really go find the thing that they're excited about and get into the life path of doing that thing. So I do both, but I do the second one kind of, maybe that's not the headline of the course, although I think that's probably why people like the course so much.
It's like a Trojan horse.
Exactly.
Element.
Yeah. Tony Robbins used to say that people hire him for success, and he has to give them that so they earn, so that he feels like he earned his money. But what he really delivers them is fulfillment. And it's a little bit like that. People take my class to learn how to be a CEO, but what they really get is hopefully on the path of doing the thing they want to do.
A lot of what you've been talking about is this kind of it's almost an assumption that you will be more successful and happier if you follow your energy, your passion, versus here's how I'll make a bunch of money, here's how I'll move up the ladder. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, Lenny, it sounds so cliche when you say it like that I almost, I almost cringe a little bit. Let me try to give it a little bit different framework where it won't sound as, because, cliches are cliches because they're true. But let me try to give you a little bit different framework to think about it. I think about it as you have your sort of your heart or your soul or your internal scorecard, and then you have your head and your mind and the world's external scorecard. And like, I'll speak from experience. So when I graduated from business school, I took the job I was supposed to take, and it was the safe job at the big private equity firm that paid well and, looked great on my resume. And I took that job. That was the external scorecard. My head said that. I built like an expected value calculation, all that stuff. The problem was it wasn't my internal scorecard. It had nothing to do with what I actually cared about and wanted to do with my life. And so the way that shows up is just this tension, friction, stress, anxiety, burnout, all those things. It just, and you can will that, you can will yourself through for long periods of time. In fact, if you want, you can will yourself through that your whole life. But then once I kind of got into the path of the thing that I was excited about, that's when I really felt my energy change dramatically. And I developed almost like a superpower in that thing because it was, I had more energy. I was willing to work longer. I was willing to do it. I've been running my company now for 23 years. I was willing to do it for a longer period of time. I thought about it in the shower. I thought about it when I went on runs. I talked to people. They wanted to join because I was excited. And it was a whole different level of power and, that I was able to, and for life force that I was able to bring to that. So I'm saying this from experience that you're going to show up so much differently in the thing that you're excited about, that alone is going to make your life a lot better. But the great irony is you're going to do so much better in that thing than you are the thing you quote are supposed to do. And I certainly understand that people have real life constraints on their finances, and I 100% get that. And so a big part of what I do with students is work through those things and say, okay, great, let's talk about this job you're going to take for X years, and you're going to pay off your loans or whatever. But during that time, let's get you on the path of the thing you really want to do. So sometime in your life, you want to, sometime soon in your life, you want to get on that path.
There's a bunch of directions I want to go here. One is I'll just share, like, what you're describing is exactly what happened to me without knowing this advice. I just started writing things online because the pull was there and people seemed to enjoy it. So I just kept following that path. And the whole time my wife's like, you can't make money writing on the internet. That's not a thing. Why would you do this? You have all these skills that can be, you can make a lot more doing other things. But I just kept doing that. And that's what led me to this life now where I make much, much more than I made as a product manager at Airbnb. And also it's a lot less stressful.
Yeah, and
And
it's
so I'm a
probably
living example. Which
probably
I'm-
that, if you go back to what I was saying before, you probably were answering the question, what would I do if I didn't have to make money? You just did that because you
Yeah.
enjoyed it. What's play for
Yeah.
you that's work for other people? What do you do in your free time? You were answering all those questions, and then I think a lot of people just say, "Oh, well, that's just a side, hustle or a hobby." It is until it isn't, right? And and you're a great example of that.
Just to set some expectations with folks, it's not like you tell me, how often does this actually work out for someone where this ended up being the right path for them, that it ended up working well for them? Just, because people can hear this and be like, yeah, okay, like I'm sure it works for some people, probably not for most people. What's like the success rate, however you define that for your students?
Okay, so the short answer is I don't know, because I don't have full information about how my students do or what their path would have been had they not done it. So it's a kind of a difficult question to answer. But what I would say is that the formula you're solving for is you excited about something for like a decade or more. So what has to happen? You excited about something, we just talked about what that is. The decade or more is going to come true more likely if you're excited about it. But also you have to go in at the beginning with that mindset and the structural ability to stay at it for a long period of time. So the missing ingredient in most of the people that fail is time. And I'll use myself as an example. I started Alpine. We lost money on our first fund. We started doing well. We got hit by the recession. We started digging out, whatever. But long story short, I was 14 years into running my firm until I could say, like, with confidence, we were going to even stay in business, let alone be really successful. And probably 18 years until we were what I would say really successful by external standards. And now 23 years, we've had a great run. But if you take away the time period, then I would have gone down as one of the quote failures, as opposed to, I would say, one of the success stories, using this methodology. So time is the variable, and I think the biggest part of that is it's really, believe it or not typically the finance or the structural piece. It's the entrepreneur or the individual's willingness to actually stay with it. And then upstream of that, it's their belief about how long it's supposed to take. And I really hate this about the social media and just media in general, where they try to paint this picture that things are going to happen overnight. And we've invested in 600 600 businesses. The vast majority, let's say 550 of those are founder started businesses where we're the first money. I've never in one of those examples seen anyone who did something quickly. They've all been very, very long stories to get to that point.
This reminds me of a quote I read that I don't know if you wrote this or you shared it. This idea that life is suffering, so choose something worth suffering for.
I wrote that. Yeah.
You wrote that. Talk about that. And because it feels like it's exactly what you're describing. It's going to take a long time.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you brought that. Yeah. I mean, think about it. Like again, using myself as an example, the first job I had I wasn't suffering any less. I was getting on planes. I was working late hours. My time was not my own. If I would have had kids, I'd be missing their little league games and all that stuff. So I'm doing that anyway. I'm just doing it for something I don't care about. And then, I start my own company and I was, quote, suffering, getting on planes, doing all that. It was just something that I cared about. So yeah, the quote, life is suffering. So figure out something worth suffering for. You're going to suffer either way. And that's another thing I think people don't realize is like, there isn't really a path that is easy that I've ever found.
You have another quote along these lines, which is everything you want is on the other side of worse first.
Yeah. I mean, I know those are two not super optimistic quotes perhaps, but they're, but I think they're true. The second one, everything you want is on the other side of worse first. And this is something where I almost can't think of many exceptions to this, where, you pick anything. You want a better body. Okay. You're going to need to go to the gym. When you go to the gym the first few times, it's going to not be that fun. You're going to set your alarm. You're going to get sore. It's not going to be great. You're going to have to probably make some changes to your diet. That's not going to be fun, at least initially. And so so that's one example. You want to change careers. You're going to have to learn a new career. You're going to have to leave your career. You're going to have to maybe interview for new jobs or whatever it is. In each case, the first move is negative. First move is negative to getting in shape. This first move is negative to get out of a bad relationship, to get into a career you want to be in. That is the reason I think that's important to say, is because if I'm optimizing for tomorrow and I just want to have a great day tomorrow, I'm going to stay exactly where I am, because my life will be better tomorrow if I don't make any changes. I don't have to break up with my girlfriend, have a hard conversation, have the tears, be alone, go on dating apps. I don't have to do that if I just stay in it one more day. So if you realize this and instead ask the question, what would the version of myself 5 years from now, what would they wish I was going to do right now? So I can guarantee you your 5-year version of yourself will say, get out of that toxic relationship, no matter how painful it is for the next 2 months. And if you can make decisions from that, and then on top of that, realize it's going to get worse first, then that's why I say everything you want is on the other side of worse first. But if you don't do that, you just end up plateauing. And so many people I see have this happen where they hit a plateau and they never move past it because they're not willing to have that hard day, month, week, year, whatever it is.
I'm imagining many people hearing this right now are like, damn, I see what I need to do now. That was really powerful advice. It makes me think of some parenting advice I recently saw. Dr. Becky has this advice of your job as a parent isn't to make your kids happy, but it's to make them resilient.
I love that. Yeah. By the way, watch how people parent. They parent exactly the opposite of that.
Exactly.
You and I both live in Marin. I don't know if you have kids or how old they are, but when you get kids in school in Marin, you see parents, they try to clear all obstacles away from their kids.
I want to talk about another exercise that you have, but before I do that, there's all this advice you're sharing that people might be hearing and be like, yeah, okay, this is great. But I'm going to share this in the intro, and we're not going to talk a lot about your fund, but I did some research on it. And from what I understand, it's one of the top performing PE funds in the world, which is very hard considering how many smart people run PE funds and how ruthless that industry is. Anything you can comment on there? And is that just I think that's important for people to know.
Well, I think one of the things I would say is that I never stand up in front of students or be on a podcast like this and say anything that I'm not doing myself or that I'm advising students or people who work at Alpine to do. And so I appreciate the kind words. And I think that the things that I'm talking about are rooted in real results. And this is not, just kind of happy talk podcast. It's one where this is the formula, I think, for greatness is to be intentional, get in the path of the thing that you're most excited about, and then give yourself several decades to do it. And that's based on, investing in 600 companies and building my own business. So I appreciate the kind call out.
Yeah. For people that are listening and be like, okay, I'm motivated, I want to do this. Other than taking your class, anything you can recommend to just like do these sorts of exercises, ask yourself these questions that you've seen work?
I mean, the answer is accountability. How do you keep yourself accountable to kind of living the life you want to live? And the analogy I would use is, let's say that you really your number one goal in life is you've got to get in better shape. You just have to. Let's say you have, even medically, that's gonna you're gonna have real health problems if you don't do that. I would say you hire yourself a personal trainer. Pay what you need to pay. Okay, maybe you don't have a ton of money, but that's where I'd spend it. That person is gonna, they're gonna hold you accountable to showing up at a certain time, and B, they're going to they're going to show you the exercises. They're going to, call you if you're not there. You're just increasing the chances of success. Plus, you spend some money. You want to get your money out of it. The equivalent of that in your life is an executive coach. And I figured this out in 2009 in the dark, recesses of the recession. I hired my first executive coach, and I was like, wow, it's a personal trainer for me for two things. Number one, make space to ask yourself the big questions in life about your career, your relationships, your health, your spirituality, your children, whatever the big things are in your life. Ask the big questions. Find out what your intention is. What are you looking for in those areas? And just have, in my case, several hours a week to get clear on those things. Okay. So that's part one. And then part two is that person can hold you accountable. I have one coach that I can't even have the call with the coach unless I fill out a piece of paper that says, or an online form that says, here's what my 1 year goals are, outcomes I want to have this year are. Here's what I did last week based on those. Here's what I'm going to do next week toward those. And here's the accountability, or here's the outcomes I want to have for the call we're about to have. And even if I never had the call, just having to fill that out every single week is incredibly powerful and allows me to hold myself accountable. Now, so 100%, that's what I'd recommend. Let's back up and say, okay, let's say you can't afford a coach, or you're worried about that. Okay. Then, and this is the same thing as, like, let's say you couldn't afford a personal trainer. I would give you the same advice, which is find a very like-minded friend of yours and sit down and do it for each other. So, if you're using the workout example, okay, you're going to go on a run Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with your friend, and they're going to meet you at 7 a.m. at this, trail, or 6 a.m. at this trail. That's your accountability. And you're going to be more likely to do it. You don't want to let them down. They're going to, beat you up if you don't get there. Same is true with this. This is how I started. I did this with my roommate in business school, and we would go on a walk for 30 minutes and talk about my dreams and hopes, and then we go on a turn around and talk about his. And it was great because we made room for each other to have those conversations, and we also developed a great friendship. So short of having an actual executive coach, you find a really like-minded person that could get into this with you, and that would be another thing. But accountability is huge. I'm going to just say one more thing. I'm sorry, I'm going on a little bit long on this, but
please.
There's another thing that happens that's kind of magical, which is you activate a different part of your brain when you talk, and you actually activate more of your brain when you talk than when you think or write. So thinking operates the least, activates the least amount of your brain. Writing is a little bit better, but talking activates like a whole different region of your brain. And so that's the other big benefit of not doing this, just on your own, is being able to talk about it with someone.
I love that there's a whole spectrum of ways to create accountability for yourself. I love the second coach you shared, where just filling out that form was basically the biggest benefit.
When I was in college, I learned this from these audio tapes. When I was in college, I had this green notebook, and I was trying to row crew, and I never rowed crew before. And I wrote down at the top of the page every single morning, I wrote down, I am the number one rower in the country. I wasn't. I was a freshman, novice, 135-pound Midwesterner, never even been on a boat. But I wrote that down. And then I wrote down 3 things I was going to do that day to move toward that goal. And I did that every single day that I was in college. And it's just incredible. We talked earlier about your subconscious mind. You're just locking your subconscious mind into your goals and where you want to go and who you want to be and how you want to show up. It's really powerful.
And that's advice anybody can implement.
You
I
could
wanna
do
be the
that.
best
You could do that tomorrow.
founder.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's such a simple thing. I want to be the best product manager. Here's 3 things I'm doing today to help me along those lines.
Absolutely. My students have to do this every twice a week. It's one of their assignments, and they actually have to turn it in. And I have so many students that say, like 5 years later, I still do this, a couple times a week, and it's been unbelievable. You will get more done. I'd say this to all your listeners: you will get more done writing down your goal and 3 things you're going to do to move toward that goal. You'll get more things done in 3 months than you will in 3 years without that.
That's an awesome thing to just try tomorrow at work. Write this down, see how it goes. The coach point, I just want to highlight that. What convinced me to get a coach back when I was working is I just realized, one, every athlete has a coach that tells them, here's how to become better. / everyone that you work with that is like a leader, an exec, basically has a coach. And the people that have an exec coach will do better in their career and life than those who don't. So why would you not have someone there just helping you become better at this craft? Like, it just makes so much sense if you can afford it. There are different price points for different coaches. Most people can probably afford it in some
That's
form.
right. That's right.
Sweet. Okay. Let's talk about another framework that you have that you call 9 lives. And this is essentially another way. It's like another way to hack your brain to come up with things you really should be doing, probably. Talk about this exercise.
So this idea of like what's my passion and what's my career goal, like it can be really intimidating, and it is intimidating. And so this exercise is to make it less intimidating. And you basically come up with nine lives. So you say your first life 1 is the life you have now. So when I did this exercise, I was, I think, let's just say, let's pretend I did this exercise when I'm, right out of school, taking that job, so life 1 is I'm working at this big firm. I live in the Bay Area, here's what I'm doing. That's life 1. And then you say, okay, now there's 2 rules. First rule is all the lives have to start from today. So you can't go back in time. They all start from today. And second rule is you have to be excited about all these lives. So I might say, hey, my second life is I want to start a private equity firm and, be a founder and be a CEO. And that's life 2. And life 3 is I want to be an author and, I want to write whatever, fiction or nonfiction. And then life 4 would be, I want to be a professor and teach. And life 5 is I want to be maybe I want to make videos and be on social media. And I want to be life 6. I want to be an actor. And you go through this whole list of these lives, and the idea is that a couple things from this exercise. One is, let's say that you're in a position where you need to be working in the job you're in. There might be one of these lives that gives you the most energy, and it's the thing if you knew you wouldn't fail, you would do this one. And it's good to recognize what that is and then pull that life a little bit into your current life. So, let's say, Lenny, that you were a product manager, but you really love doing podcasts, and that was one of your 9 lives. Start, do a podcast every other week, and just pull it into your life, it sounds like what you did. You started doing it as a side hustle, and then that'll have 2 amazing effects. One is you will just have more energy everywhere else in your life. Like, forget if you ever do this full time or not. Just the act of pulling something into your life you're really excited about will give you a tremendous amount of energy. And then the second thing is you'll ideally find the path that is the thing that that gives you the most energy. The other thing that I've learned in doing this exercise is you actually can have pretty much all 9 lives. You can't have them at once, but over the life, if you're fortunate enough to live, long enough, you can have all of these things. So I have, had the corporate job, been the founder, been the professor, been a writer, had videos, taught people, I've been able to bring in, most of those lives into this current life.
There's a couple things there that come up as you talk about. One is on that point, what I do now is my fourth career. First, I was an engineer, then I became a founder, then I was a PM, and now I do whatever the heck this is. And I think people don't realize that's how life often goes. You think you're going to do one thing, and then you have many different careers that pivot into.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing. It's just trying to make it a little less intimidating. Like you don't have to have this one life purpose, passion thing that you do for the rest of your life. If you just follow the thing that gives you energy at each time, it'll probably be a good indication of like where you want to be going.
The other thread there is, I know one of your other really important pieces of advice is to avoid this not now idea where everyone's like, here's the thing I should be doing, my genie goal, but not now. Thoughts on just how to think about that of just like, okay, I know I have these lives I could live, but not now on this or that.
Yeah. I mean, in 20 years of teaching, I've never had a student come to me and say, hey, Graham, my real dream is to do X, but I'm just going to give up on it. I'm not going to do it. No one's ever said that. Instead, they say, not now. And not now, if they're not careful, will turn into not ever, because not now is just really another way of saying I'm not going to do it. And then there's a million reasons why you can't do it now. And those reasons, some of them are legit, some of them are just fear, fear in another form. So in terms of like how to overcome that, I think it's kind of helpful to realize that it's never really the right time. Like when you're making a change or you're going to go do something different, it's never going to feel secure and safe. You're always going to have some fear. You're always going to feel like you're not ready. You're going to feel like it's too soon. You're going to feel like you don't know exactly what that path looks like. And so just understanding that's normal, that's called entrepreneurship. That's called like life. And if you wait for the clouds to part and this ray of sun to come down and say, now is the time, you're going to wait your whole life. And so I think that realization can maybe be helpful. And then try to figure out like, what are the things that need to be true for you to launch? And usually for my students, it's something financial that is the big bottleneck. And what I tell them is, people have raised money to start a business before. That's happened. Where you've had people who've started businesses without their own money that have been able to pay themselves, and that's not a reason to not do it. Like it's an obstacle. It's something you have to solve, but it's not an insurmountable obstacle.
This touches on a quote I definitely wanted to get to, something that you wrote not long ago. Here's the quote. The most important thing I've learned in the first 50 years of my life is that the true game of life is an internal one, not an external one. And that journey starts with 3 powerful words. I am enough. Talk about that. Why is that so important?
Well, that's a really kind of deep topic. And, but I'll talk about the internal and external journey.
Yeah.
So life presents itself as a series of external obstacles and events, and it feels very much like an external journey, and it can feel that way your whole life. But what you'll realize, and I started realizing this when I really started meditating and spending time kind of distancing myself from the subconscious thoughts, is a very, very large part of life is internal. I say very large part because obviously you need some food, clothing, shelter, some basic needs that are external. But for most people that have the ability to even listen to this podcast, I would say the vast majority of your life is internal. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you're writing a story about what it is you think you need to be happy, or you're writing a story about things you think you need to be enough, or to be respected, or to feel worthy, or to get admiration of other people. you're writing that story, and that it's just a story. And if you really follow this logic, you'll realize it is 100% just a story, or it's a story that you should even care. And then that opens up a lot more agency that you have over deciding what is important to you. What is your internal scorecard? What are the things that matter to you, not what the external world thinks, or what or the story you've been writing for a long time. When you start to open this up, it's really kind of scary at first, because you'll start to realize most of the things you're operating from are really just stories that have been written at some point in your life. And so it's actually terrifying at first, and then it starts to become really liberating.
Was there an example of that in your life? Because externally it feels like you're killing it. A killer PE fund, teaching at Stanford, like the scorecard's looking good. So it's interesting you say that.
The first time I really realized this was when it was in 2015. I mentioned to you, it took me 14 years to be successful. So we had just sold the last company from our second fund, which is where we really got paid. I had a financial event it wasn't like I never have to work again in my life. It was just like I could exhale a little bit. I knew I was going to be able to pay my mortgage and put my kids through college. It was that kind of an event. And for like a couple days, I was euphoric because I felt like I'd worked so hard for this. I'd been, again, at this for 15 years, but really longer than that. If you go back to getting into college and the whole thing, it had been a long journey. And then it hit me that nothing changed, nothing internally changed at all. I still had the same problems. I still felt the same way about myself. I still had the same kind of a lot of, negative thoughts about myself, like nothing, like this goal that I thought that I had for this whole long period of time. It didn't actually change anything. It changed externally for sure. I like I said, I could exhale and pay my mortgage, and those are all really good things. But that was the first time when I realized, like, oh, wait a second. It's really up to me to find things that are going to give me joy, and the achievement of some kind of external event is not one of those things. And I know that sounds really, really weird, but there's so many people that I've heard that have had very, very similar stories. And so it was really disorienting for me. And it was the first time in my life where I experienced depression, because I just had this thought of like, well, that wasn't what I thought. I think I was working my whole life for that, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so now I was thinking, well, what is it then? What is the thing that's going to give me joy? And then that takes some introspection to ask those questions.
I was just having a conversation with a friend who's an angel investor, and he just had a bunch of exits. And he's like, cool, I got some money in my bank account now, but I don't feel anything. Like, it just doesn't. I thought I'd be like, holy moly, it's all, this is exactly what I was hoping for, and nothing changed. Exactly how you're describing.
I think you get a little bit of peace of mind when you have some financial security, which is valuable. But in terms of, now my life changes, now I'm enough, now I am happy, now I feel good about myself. None of that changes for really anybody that I know.
And the hardest part, as you said, is you think it will. You think,
right.
Oh, I'll be so happy once I achieve this thing. And I think an example of this is just, there's a lot of miserable billionaires from what I've read and seen. And that should tell you a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe a second to last question. I'm curious if there's anything recently you're focused on, I've been thinking a lot about, that you maybe changed your mind about, or has kind of changed the way you think about the world.
The last 2 years, I had my two oldest boys go off to college, 2022 and then 2024. And that really hit me hard. You would think that I would have been preparing for that for 18 years for each of them. But for some reason, it just really hit me really, really hard. And I think it was a real wake-up call of mortality, I guess, and to realize that nothing goes on forever. And, these wonderful people that I had lived with for 18 years were no no longer going to really be a part of my daily life. And that really set me off on a journey of a lot of spiritual work, doing a lot of meditating and working with some gurus, and it's been really profound, and it's put me a lot closer in touch with the things that really matter to me, and given me I've given myself more permission to spend time doing those things than the kind of normal external world type things. So that was a pretty profound change for me. And the spiritual journey is a arguably really the important journey. If and this could be a longer conversation, but and maybe you have the luxury of doing that journey, as you get older or something. But it's been a really profound journey.
I'm excited to see what insights come out of this part of your life. Final question before we get to our very exciting lightning round. We have this segment on the podcast I call Failure Corner, where people come on this podcast, they share all these wins. Oh, I have this amazing PE fund that's killing it. I teach at Stanford. I've launched all these things. All these students are so great. Life's amazing. Nothing ever goes wrong. When in reality, it does. And those stories often aren't told. So I'm curious if there's a story you could share of a time you failed in your career and if you learned something from that experience, what you learned.
Yeah, I'll tell a couple stories. So when I was in high school, I wrestled and I cut a lot of weight to make the varsity team, and I was not in the best mental place because of cutting weight. But anyway, I lost a big match my junior year, and I quit, and I never wrestled again, and that haunted me. So first of all, that was a failure, a big failure for me, and it really haunted me. And so I kind of, after that, made a promise to myself that I wasn't going to have that happen again. When I went to college, I tried to row crew. I failed year after year trying to make the team, trying to make the boat. Eventually had some, real success my senior year, but prior to that, just failure after failure. And then at Alpine, I mean, we lost money on our first fund. We had real trouble during the recession. We made a lot of, I think 5 of my first 8 investments I ever made in my life lost money. And that in venture world, that's one thing, but in private equity, that's a whole different ratio, which is not a good ratio at all. When I first started teaching, wasn't good at teaching. What had a lot of insecurities was I was really young when I started, and I didn't feel like I had really anything to share with the students. And I think that showed up, and it took me a long time to kind of figure that out. So I guess almost my entire track record is one that starts with things not going well, and then just over a long period of time of chipping away looks like a success on paper, but anytime in that early in the process would look like an abject failure. So I'm quite familiar with failure in the form of setbacks. I think the ultimate failure, though, was the wrestling one where I just quit. That was really the only one I would characterize as a failure. The other ones, because I kept going and staying with it, turned out to work out well, with a lot of scars and bruises. But the failure would have been quitting.
I love that this circles back to your core advice of stick with it. Most things that are important or take a long time, and there's a lot of suffering.
Yeah, they do.
Involved.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to ask, I can't help but ask at this point, because I think a lot of people are wondering this, just like, when do you quit? When should you quit something? Because some things are just not worth it. Is there any advice there you could share?
Yes, for sure. I think the time to quit is when you can no longer see the vision, and you can no longer really believe the vision. And then when that happens for a long period of time, or when maybe you're no longer even excited about the vision, somewhere in there, I think the excited one you have to be a little careful of, because in the dark days, it's exciting is not the word you're going to use, but at least like in our company for the first 10 years, it was not going well, but each time I could start to, we'd make fewer mistakes. We'd start to see something working. We do one really good deal in this fund. We start to learn from that. We get one really good hire. We learn from that. We would, little by little start to see these green shoots. And I have this unbelievable, there's an unbelievable statement. I didn't write it. Dan and Chip Heath wrote it in their book Switch, which is scale your bright spots, find what's working and do more of that. And as you start to progress, like for me, for example, at Alpine, almost all the time, we always had at least a small glimmer of a bright spot, and then we'd scale that. And then we'd continue forward and we'd find some more and we'd scale those. And over time, all those bright spots became our business. That became what we did. That became our strategy. That became how we hired people. That became where we recruited from. That became, all those bright spots just started to magnify until the entire business was pretty much a bright spot. So, but it took time because we had to figure out where those were, and we had to do a lot of things wrong to figure out where the bright spots were.
Graham, is there anything else that you wanted to share or you think is important to leave listeners with before we get to our very exciting lightning round?
I mean, I think what I would say is just in general, you got one life, you get one shot, and so take the time to really figure out and answer the question, what does a wonderful, amazing, incredible life look like? And just get as clear as you possibly can on that. No matter how crazy or aspirational it seems, write it down. Write down that thing that would make this life amazing, and write it down for your life, your career, your relationships, your friends, your body, your spirituality, your financial situation. And just the first magic is just knowing what you want. And I'd say 90% of people never even know what they want. So take the time to do that. And the more clear you are on that, the more invested you are in that, the more likely you are to make it come true.
What I love about that is you don't have to do this thing. Just step one is understand what it could be if you could do that. And it's like almost like understand where your Google directions could take you if you turned off autopilot.
Right.
Oh man. Okay. Well, with that, Graham, we reached our very exciting lightning round. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
First question: what are 2 or 3 books that you find yourself recommending most to other people?
So in the sort of realm of a lot of the topics we've been talking about, which is your internal and external game, I love the book Untethered Soul, and I love the book Don't Believe Everything You Think. They have very similar themes, but they come at it differently. But I think both of those will really change your perspective if you read them. And then a very, very practical book that's probably the book I've read more than any other book is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which was written in like 1930. But it is absolutely, there's no other book like it. There's a reason that people are still recommending it 100 years after it's written. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, that book, I still think about it often, even though I read it like 30 years ago at this point. I love that recommendation. And it's like a very old book to read, but you have to get past that fact that it was written a long time ago. Okay, next question. Do you have a favorite recent movie or TV show you've really enjoyed?
I for the first time watched the movie Where the Crawdads Sing, and I just loved it. It's kind of a romantic comedy, or not comedy, sorry, romantic love story meets murder mystery meets coming of age. And it really, really touched me. And then I probably read the book as well. So I love that.
Do you have a favorite product you recently discovered that you really love?
I'm a really big fan of sleep. I think it makes a massive difference in your life, and that's a whole other topic we could go down another time. But so I have a few things that have helped me on that. So if you saw me sleeping, I have earplugs, I have a noise machine, I have a sleep mask, and then I have a chili pad that goes on my bed to keep the bed cool. And I sleep great. All those things really help. The earplugs and mask and noise machine kind of allow you to not hear the ambient noise. And then there's a lot of research actually on the temperature at which you want to sleep, and your body goes up and down throughout the night. So this chili pad that goes under your mattress, there's a whole bunch of versions of that, and that helps a lot.
I also sleep with an eye mask, and My wife and I rotate the earplugs because someone has to pay attention to the
There you
baby
go.
in case
Yeah,
he
makes sense.
wakes up. And this chili pad, is this like the 8 sleep or is this like a just a cold
Well,
bag?
no, so I actually bought the 8 sleep, and it was just too
Yeah.
much. Like it would
Yeah, it's a
turn
lot.
on and off, and I would wake
Yeah, yeah,
up,
yeah.
and then it would track my sleep, and then I'd start to freak out because it'd tell me I wasn't sleeping well. So I actually returned it, and I got a really simple one called Uller, and it just turns on and off. There's no timing, or there's no like any weird functionality. So it was a lot cheaper, and it works better for me. So that everyone use their own thing, but that one worked better for me.
Okay, next question. 2 more questions. Do you have a favorite life motto that you often think about that you find useful in work or in life?
I love this quote that is kind of sums up a lot of what we talked about in the podcast. It's by Howard Thurman, and he says, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask instead what makes you come alive, because what the world needs most is for you to come alive." And I think that just talks about, it's really about you coming alive. That's the most important thing. And that is going to have so much positive exhaust in the world. And things from that will come that you can't even imagine right now.
I was thinking of that quote as you were describing your philosophy. Final question. I feel like a lot of people might be listening to this being like, I came here for one of the most legendary private equity investors of all time. And you don't talk about private equity at all. So let me just use this opportunity to ask you just a question here. What is it what do you look for in a company that you want to buy that maybe other people don't? Is there some insight you can share?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to talk about private equity, by the way. It's just we talked.
We'll do another episode
Yeah,
on that.
yeah.
This could be a whole podcast episode. I understand.
Really happy to talk about that. So I'll say like more. I'll answer the question more like what's a little bit of a different philosophy that we have. So when we were coming out of the recession, and I hired this coach, we looked at all of our companies, and we were looking for like where did we make our most money and what was the most consistent trend, and like we looked at valuation, growth rates, capital structure, geography, industry. We cut the data every way you could imagine. And we had these 3 companies that kept showing up on all these lists that were 3 of our top performers, but they didn't seem to really have anything in common. And then we're like, well, they have one thing in common, which is they started off really badly, so badly, in fact, that we put our own person from Alpine in to go run the company. And then they ended up becoming our best companies. So we said, wait a second, maybe that's the highly correlated thing, is us putting our own team in place, and even upstream of that, maybe just having an incredible management team. So that was foundational. And we now we put our own leadership team in 100% of the time. And not only that, but we have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to build a program to help people who are in their late 20s, early 30s, learn how to become CEOs. And that's been foundational. So the thing that we probably believe to be true that not that many people agree with us on is that the management team is really where we think all the alpha comes from. You can't get the industry wrong, because if you hire the best management team in the world to run a typewriter business, you're going to lose money. So you can't be wrong on the industry, but you also don't have to be perfect on the industry. You have to have a good enough industry, and then a world-class management team. And we found that to be a really good formula for consistent returns. And and it's way more fun because you're literally in a board meeting with someone that is on your side of the table, because you hired them and put them in. And so you're building the company together, and they're bringing a lot of the similar values. And so it's been a real differentiator for us.
I have so many questions, but I'm going to cut it off there. We could do another episode going deep on all this. Graham, this was amazing. I think we're going to be helping a lot of people with what they want to do with their lives, and if nothing else, give them a little opportunity to break out of autopilot, at least for a little bit. 2 final questions. Where can folks find you online if they want to maybe follow up, ask maybe some other questions that they are thinking as they hear this? And then how can listeners be useful to you?
My website's grahamweaver.com. I have a blog on there, as well as a lot of videos and different things. And then on Instagram and TikTok, I'm Graham C. Weaver. And then I'm on LinkedIn, I'm Graham Weaver. And on YouTube, I think I'm Graham C. Weaver. So Graham C. Weaver will pretty much get you on all those channels. How can listeners be helpful? I would say I'd love to hear from you. So my best way to reach me is grahamweaverblog.com, and tell me what's on your mind. I may not respond 100%, but I will read all the emails. And then if you're interested, subscribe to my blog. So go to my website, grahamweaver.com. And I have a blog where I talk about a lot of the topics that we're talking about today.
Amazing. Graham, thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you, Lenny.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode. We're going to be talking about how to grow your power.
The reason why you should pay attention to this is because it leads to a lot of good things. Salary, getting promoted, being happy in your career, being less stressed.
You're not describing how the world should work. This is just how it is.
Not only is, but how it was and how it will be.
The 7 rules of power. Get out of your own way, break the rules, show up in a powerful fashion, create a powerful brand, network relentlessly, use your power, and understand that once you've acquired power, what you did to get there will be forgiven, forgotten, or both.
This is not about personality. These are skills that can be mastered.
People might be hearing this and they're like, I don't want to be this person.
Well, you already have done a fabulous job of illustrating principle 1. That is one way to get in our own way. If I think power is dirty, the first thing that's going to happen is I'm not going to do what I need to do to be successful in my career.
The opening quote to your book that I have here, if you want power to be used for good, more good people need to have power.
That's exactly right.
Today, my guest is Jeffrey Pfeffer. Jeffrey is a professor of organizational behavior at Stanford's Graduate School of Business and teaches one of the 2 most popular and oversubscribed courses in all of the MBA program called The Paths to Power. The other class, by the way, is Touchy-Feely, which we dove into last month. In his class and in his recent book, The 7 Rules of Power, Jeffrey teaches the things that you can do in your life and in your work to build your power, and through that, get things done and advance in your career. As one student described the class, it's the cod liver oil of the Graduate School of Business. You know it's good for you, but you feel a little nervous about it. In our conversation, we dig into each of the 7 powers, why it's important to build these skills, even if you feel uncomfortable. We talk through a bunch of examples of the power in action and the impact it has had on people's lives, why it isn't as cringy or scary as you may think. I was actually nervous to have this conversation, and I ended up being a huge fan of Jeffrey and the work that he does. We end the conversation with what you can start doing today to start building your own power. This podcast is basically for anyone that wants to advance in their career, whether you're an IC or a CEO, and I'm really excited to bring it to you. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes, and it helps the podcast tremendously. With that, I bring you Jeffrey Pfeffer. Jeffrey, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lenny. I am honored that you invited me on.
I'm even more honored that you decided to come on. We're going to be talking about something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I think it's going to make me uncomfortable. We're going to be talking about how to grow your power in life and in business. Let me just start by asking, why does this stuff make people uncomfortable, and why is it still important for people to learn how to do this well?
Well, it's important because a guy named Gerald Ferris developed a scale of kind of political skill, and he and a bunch of his colleagues over the years did a lot of empirical research that demonstrates that political skill is associated with a lot of positive outcomes. Salary, getting promoted, being happy in your career, being happy in your job, being less stressed. So the reason why you should pay attention to this is because it leads to a lot of good things. The reason why it makes people uncomfortable, you said it made you uncomfortable. Maybe I should ask you the question. Why does it make you uncomfortable?
There's a lot of things here that are probably not how people want to live their life necessarily, or want other people to act.
Yeah. So I think it makes people uncomfortable because the realities of what it takes to get power bear almost no resemblance to what you're taught in Sunday school or the mosque or wherever, how your parents raised you. They bear almost no resemblance to how we think the world ought to be. They bear a little resemblance, to our aspirations. And I think we look around the world and we see people who have acquired enormous amounts of power and have used it for bad. But I tell people, I see people with hammers hitting other people on the head. That does not mean that a hammer is not a useful tool. You can take a screwdriver and stab it into somebody's belly. I have a very dear friend who we'll probably talk about later in the podcast, Laura Esserman, is a breast cancer surgeon. And I tell people, Laura has a knife. She uses it to cure cancer. Muggers have knives. They use it to rob people. So I think we have confused the tool for how it has been used.
You also have this quote that the people who need to understand power and build their power skills are people who come from backgrounds or characteristics who would normally put them at a disadvantage.
I think that's exactly right. I will go this Sunday to Nashville, Tennessee, to talk to a bunch of people of color in the NFL who are trying to rise up the ranks. And the Stanford runs a program because the NFL is serious, I think, about trying to make more opportunity for people, underrepresented minorities. But these are folks who will not succeed unless they learn power skills, because the world is stacked against them in lots of ways.
This episode is brought to you by Wizard, empowering product leaders to ideate and iterate faster. The element of your course that you try to make clear in your syllabus is to teach people not to be as judgmental. You also have this whole huge bold phrase, this class is not for everyone. Can you just talk a bit about maybe why it's not for everyone and then why that being less judgmental is important?
The class is extremely popular. I have a long waiting list. It's kind of mythical. And because of the principle of social influence, we are influenced by what other people do. We're influenced in our choices of restaurants. We're influenced in our choices of music. I'm not sure I like Taylor Swift, but I certainly want to go see Taylor Swift because everybody else is. And many people sign up for the class. And one year in particular, there were some people who sat in about the third row up directly in front of me. And they looked every day like they were having some terrible thing put up, some horrible orifice or something. They looked literally in pain. And so I decided, and of course they learned nothing. If you come to the class and you're in that much psychological discomfort, you're not going to learn anything. And so what I try to do is tell people that in order to benefit from this class, you have to be open to learning the material. And if you're not, and by the way, this would be true for any class. If you go to physics and you say, I don't like physics, I hate physics, I don't believe in physics, I don't believe in the theory of physics, whatever, you're not going to learn anything. And so I'm trying to get the class, given the huge waiting list, I'm trying to get the class to have people in it who are in fact going to benefit from it, rather than sit there and look like they're in pain. And the judgmental thing, if Matthew 7, judge not that ye be not judged. The Quran says only Allah can judge people. The American poet Walt Whitman said, be curious, not judgmental. Mother Teresa said, if you judge people, you have no time to love them. Judgment, if I need to build a positive relationship with Lenny because you are on my critical path in my job, and jobs necessarily entail a reasonable amount of interdependence. I get things done through and with other people. If I decide that Lenny is whatever set of bad adjectives you want to use, dumb, incompetent, immoral, whatever, my ability to build a positive relationship with you, and you remain on my critical path, becomes almost zero unless you're a better actor, or I'm a better actor than I think most people are. So therefore, you should suspend judgment in the sense that if somebody is on your critical path, the only judgment you should make is they're on my critical path. If I want to get something done, I need their collaboration and cooperation. And the fact that I may not like them is in fact irrelevant. And as I have taught senior executives over the years, it is absolutely clear to me that one of the skills that they have mastered is they have a skill that you cannot tell what they think of you. And that's important because I need your collaboration. I need your cooperation. And if I leak out, in ways that say, I don't respect you, or I don't like you, I don't admire you, whatever, my odds of getting you to work productively with me goes essentially to zero. So that's the judgmental story. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I have a quote from your syllabus along these lines. Not everyone we encounter in paths to power is someone you're going to want to emulate. This is a class about how to get things done, how to build and wield influence. And there are multiple ways to accomplish these objectives.
Yep.
Yeah. So I've had two friends actually go through the course. One, I asked about the course and the impact it had on her. She's actually a founder now. And she told me that your class was her single most favorite class at all of Stanford Business School because it was realistic and applicable to life as a founder, because it didn't sugarcoat business, it didn't sugarcoat life. It told her how the world really works, and it is helping her succeed with her startup right now.
Thank you. There's no higher praise than that. I mean, I actually don't read. I shouldn't probably say this in public, but I don't actually read my course evaluations because the impact I want to have is not to have people like me, but to have that kind of impact, to make people more successful, more effective in their lives.
That is a good segue to your rules of power. So let's just talk about your 7 rules of power. I actually have your book right here. And if folks want to learn more, here it is, 7 Rules of Power. This is your 4th book about power, and this is your best book about power because it basically summarizes everything you've learned in a really cohesive way. So let me first share the 7 rules of power, and then I'm going to dive into a few of them. Does that sound good?
That sounds perfect.
Okay, so the 7 rules. 1, get out of your own way. 2, break the rules. 3, appear powerful. 4, build a powerful brand. Network relentlessly. Use your power. And success excuses almost.
Everything. Correct.
Oh, okay. Success excuses everything almost. Got it. Okay, so let me start with Power 4, which is around personal brand. And the reason I want to start here is I have a friend that's actually in your class right now, Raf. And I saw that he started a podcast. And he told me that he did it because it was part of the homework that you give students. You call it Doing Power. Is that the name of the homework assignments?
Yeah, I have. So we give them a bunch of assignments throughout the class, which are self-reflective assignments. But their big thing for the class is they have to do power. They have to do something during the quarter to take the principles of the class, of what they're learning, and put them into practice. And that is because, everything I do for a reason. That is because if you don't use what you learn, the learning will disappear. So if you go to a French class and you learn French and you never speak French, in about a relatively short period of time, you'll forget everything you learned. And so I want the learning to stick with them. So I try to get them to do something with it.
While we're on this tangent, because I wanted to talk about you have a book, The Knowing Gap, right?
Yep.
The Doing Gap. So let's just spend a little time there because I think that's really important. What are some examples of things that have come out of people doing these homework assignments, things that have maybe led to something interesting?
Let me take my most extreme example. My most extreme example is probably Derek Kahn, K-A-N. And Derek Kahn was a little bit older when he went through the MBA program. And in 2012, his Doing Power project was to get appointed to be Mitt Romney's, Mitt Romney was running for president, to be head of economic policy for the Romney campaign. Wow. Believe it or not, he was offered the job. Believe it or not, he turned it down for reasons which we could go into if you want, but aren't that interesting. He wound up relatively soon thereafter as number 3 in the transportation department, working for Elaine Chao. And I have a picture of him. When he comes to the class, I introduce him. I tell students, I give them a trigger warning, and I introduce him. He wound up at the end of the Trump administration as the deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget. And since typical of the Trump administration, by that time there was no director, he essentially ran the $6 trillion US budget. This is 6 years out of business school.
I was thinking whether he got that during his class. Amazing. Okay, so this is a success story of doing power. Let's talk about this first power of building brand. And I think this is where people start to feel uncomfortable. They're going to be like, oh no, I don't want to be doing this. This doesn't feel good to me. So let's talk about it.
Okay.
Let's see. So talk about this power of building a personal brand.
There are, by definition, fewer positions at the top than at the bottom. The world, we may not like this. And I know people, the late Tony Hsieh at Zappos tried to do, holacracy or whatever. But the world is essentially hierarchical. The animal kingdom is hierarchical. It is better to be at the top than at the bottom for a number of reasons. Okay. If that is true, if there are fewer positions at the top than at the bottom, then your job to advance your career is to figure out how to get promoted. There are many ways to get promoted, but I will guarantee you one thing. No one is going to promote Lenny if they don't know who the hell you are. So it is not sufficient for them to know who you are. They have to know that you're smart and personable and have whatever skills you've got. But they have to know you. If they don't know you, you cannot choose what is not in your head. You know that better than I do. So therefore, you have to do something to differentiate yourself. You have to build a brand. So when I think of Lenny and your podcast, I think of something, not just, 25 billion podcasts. When I think of somebody in McKinsey or Bain or BCG, one of the consulting firms, a gazillion people start off as frontline consultants. What are you going to do so that somebody knows who you are? What are you going to do that creates value for the firm and for you? So my friend Keith Ferrazzi, when he started at Deloitte Consulting, did not do the spreadsheet stuff that he was, by the way, not very good at and didn't like. He started the Lincoln Quality Award. He decided to try to take Deloitte's brand recognition from about 1 or 2% to 30%. He was appointed, though he left before he actually took the job, to the position of partner and the first chief marketing officer at Deloitte. I have another friend, Tristan Walker, who wanted to get hired at Foursquare. He sent emails to the founder. The founder ignored him. So Tristan Walker did something I think very bold. Tristan Walker began signing up partnerships. So one day the founder says, holy God, he signed up Starbucks. Maybe I ought to hire this guy. So you have to do something that causes people to know who you are. And that is what building a brand is about.
It sounds very benign, put that way. When people hear, I need to build a personal brand, it sounds like I need to post on LinkedIn, I need to post on Twitter, start a newsletter, start a podcast, which I know is a kind of a part of it. But what are some examples you've seen of ways to build a personal brand that are effective?
So I have a friend who I bring to the class, a lovely, tall Asian woman named Laura Chow, who made partner at a venture capital firm after 4 years, which is fast. Laura works for Canaan Partners, C-A-N-A-A-N. Laura said, I do not work for Andreessen Horowitz. I do not work for Sequoia. I don't work for Greylock. I don't work for any of these very visible, large, VC firms. So if I am going to get deals in the consumer space, that's her domain of expertise, is consumer and consumer tech. Somebody is going to have to know who Laura Chow is, because again, you're not going to get a deal if nobody knows who you are. And so she basically did everything you talked about. She did writing. She started a podcast in which she invited influential people on. She contributed to a book. She helped people out. She did networking dinners. She did everything she could so that people would recognize and know Laura Chow. And one of the things she did was she's tall. In general, Asian women are not tall. She decided to play up the fact that she was, in the words of some people, the tallest Asian woman they'd ever seen. She wears heels. In her heels, she's 6 feet 1 inches tall. She also, when she comes to my class, many people come to my class in hoodies, God knows what. She has style, and it's a unique style. So she thinks about very strategically, how am I going to dress? How am I going to look? How am I going to show up? How am I going to do what I need to do so that people know who I am? Obviously, there's substance. If you have visibility without substance, people will know you're like useless. But if you have substance without visibility, no one will know the substance that you got.
You also talk about how you can reframe this idea of not being self-promotional, but it's amplifying the impact of the team that I work with, or it's me scaling myself by sharing things I know and pointing people to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on to a different power. Let's talk about power one, which is getting out of your own way. Talk about what that means and how someone can work on that.
Well, you already have done a fabulous job of illustrating principle one by talking about how this is the topic that makes people uncomfortable. And when something makes people uncomfortable, in general, they're going to shy away from it. So if I think power is dirty, if I think power is evil, if I think power is something I want nothing to do with, the first thing that's going to happen is I'm not going to do what I need to do to be successful in my career. So that is one way in which we get in our own way. Another way in which we get in our own way, many people suffer from what is called in the psychology literature imposter syndrome. They believe that they were the admissions mistake at Stanford. They were the hiring mistake in whatever company they're working for. That somehow they got to this job, but they don't really deserve to be there because they're surrounded by people who are smarter and better than them. And therefore, they will do things which I can't even believe that this goes on. So I will have students, not many, but a few. They'll raise their hand. I will call them. And the first things out of their mouth will be, I don't know if this comment is going to be useful. This is called preemptory apology. If the comment's not really useful, don't say it. That's number one. But number two, don't apologize. Pardon me for interrupting. Pardon me for, taking up your time. Stop all this apologizing. If you got the job you're in, you probably are not only qualified, you're probably overqualified. So don't use descriptors of yourself that disempower you. Don't think of yourself as not deserving of the job that you hold, because that attitude will leak out and other people will say, if Lenny doesn't think he deserved the job, then maybe I shouldn't think he deserves the job either.
So basically the first power is you're shooting yourself in the foot by worrying too much about whether people like you. This friend of mine who's now the founder that I read some quotes from, she said her number one takeaway from your class is if you want to be liked, get a dog.
That's correct. That is a quote from my dear friend Gary Loveman, who for many years ran Harrah's, which then became Caesars, the casino company.
You also talk about this. Yeah, there's this quote I have: acknowledge that others are often no better than you.
Yep.
Because that makes you feel better about this. So for people that actually want to be liked, I like being liked. I don't know if it's a flaw in my upbringing. Is the lesson you're capped on your power if you want to be liked?
At the end of the day, you don't want to be intentionally disliked. You don't want to violate my dear friend Bob Sutton's book, The No Asshole Rule, and gratuitously be an asshole. But you are hired to get a job done. It's interesting. I unfortunately am now too old. In the words of my chiropractor, I'm suffering from too many birthdays. So I have a lot of doctors who are doing a great job. Trust me, when I choose a doctor, unfortunately, he retired, a neurosurgeon who did two surgeries on my spine. He's considered to be one of the top 20 in the country. If you go on Yelp, you read about his personality and his office furniture. As I said to somebody, he's doing microsurgery on my spine. I can wind up permanently paralyzed. I really don't care about his personality. I don't care about his office furniture. That's an extreme example, but it makes the point. When you are put in a role, because presumably you are supposed to perform in that role. If you get appointed to be a head coach, if we make you a quarterback on an NFL team, or we make you, center on a National Basketball Association team, you did not get that job because people thought you had a cute personality. You got that job because you have the skills to make your organization successful. And if you do not use those skills because you're worried about what everybody else is thinking, you are not only harming yourself, but you're harming them because you are not doing what you were hired to do.
So a simple way of thinking about this, which makes me feel better about, as we talk through this, I'm becoming less uncomfortable with these, which is a good sign. It's don't actively try to be disliked. It's don't prioritize being liked, prioritize competence and
Correct.
respect.
Absolutely.
and doing the thing that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's talk about rule number 2, which is break the rules. So basically, again, these powers are ways to grow power. And you're saying that if you break the rules, you get more power. Talk about why that's the case, what that looks like.
Well, for many reasons. Number one, when you break the rules, you stand out. You become memorable. When you do something that's unexpected, and being memorable is, of course, important, as we've already discussed. That's number one. Number two, the rules were made mostly by the people who are favored by the rules in place. So if we were talking about business strategy, we would talk about a word that is probably now overused. We would talk about being a disruptor, that you would disrupt an industry. And how do you disrupt an industry? By doing something that is different from the other industry incumbents. In Southwest Airlines, you don't do hub and spoke. In Amazon, you provide an incredible level of customer service. Whole Foods, you don't optimize on the cost of the stuff in your store, but you optimize on fitting local tastes. Whatever. You would be a disruptor. You would do things that are different. The same principle holds for you. That if you are going to be successful, you have to do what, number one, plays to your strengths, to use the title of a Gallup book. Number two, you have to do things, again, that cause you to stand out. And you have to do things that basically, will make you more successful. One of the conventional wisdoms that people, I think, adhere to way too much is don't ask. Don't ask. Don't ask for help. You need to show self-sufficiency. So my colleague, Frank Flynn, wrote an article with Vanessa Lake entitled, "If You Need Help, Just Ask." And it turns out people overestimate how many people they're going to have to ask to get help. And it turns out that asking for help makes people uncomfortable. But when I was married, and if you read the acknowledgments in 7 Rules of Power, for more than 35 years, I was married to Kathleen Frances Fowler, who I could send you a picture. I mean, she looks literally like a supermodel. And I'd never have been any particularly better looking than I am now. So somebody said to me, "How'd you get her to go out with you?" And the answer, of course, is, I asked. No one, well, maybe not no one, but few people are going to go out with you if you don't ask them out. Few people are going to marry you if you don't ask them to marry you. Few people are going to do anything if you don't ask. And what is the worst that could happen? If you ask and they say no, you are no worse off than had you not asked in the first place. Because if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. If you ask and they say no, you're not going to get it. Get over your ego, ask.
Is there another example that comes to mind of someone breaking the rules, say in business, that ended up being really successful as a result, or just someone that is really good at this in business?
I can give you many examples. One of my favorite examples would be Jason Calacanis. I don't know if you know Jason.
Oh, yeah. I know you did a case study on him.
Yeah.
I know him well.
Yeah. So I think Jason, I think consistently breaks all kinds of rules. First of all, when he comes to my class, nobody likes him, but that's okay. Almost nobody likes him. But
that's power number one. He's not worried about it.
That's number one. But also, I think there's a conventional wisdom in the venture capital industry, which he defies almost completely. He makes a lot of little bets, not a few big bets. He runs a very lean operation. He doesn't have a lot of partners. He doesn't have actually any partners, so he can't be fired by his partners. He began his career in journalism, and which is interesting. Being a journalist is a wonderful job because you get to ask people all kinds of questions. And if you ask smart people questions and you have some reasonable level of intelligence yourself, at the end of that process, you're going to wind up incredibly smart and incredibly insightful. And he wound up incredibly smart and insightful around aspects of the internet industry.
And he definitely has a lot of power. I think that I'm going to link to the case study in our show notes where you basically walk through how he went from nothing to a very powerful person.
And by the way, a very rich person as well.
Let's talk about another power, Power 5, networking relentlessly. What does that look like, and how do you get better at this?
Well, I think there's research that shows that many people find networking dirty. And that's because I think they think about it in the wrong way. My friend John Levy, who has written a fabulous book, You're Invited, which is a book about how to put on events that people want to come to, and is a fabulous human being, will tell you that the first principle of networking is, in fact, generosity. It is generosity. What can I do for you? How can I be helpful? Who can I introduce you to? Either a company or a product or a person who can be helpful to you in your career. But in order to be able to introduce you to someone who's going to be useful to you, I have to know people. If I don't know anybody, I can't introduce you to anybody. And the more people I know, the more likely it will be that if you say, I need to know somebody in X, I will know that person. So the broader your social network, the more people and the more things you will know. If knowledge is power, networking is a fabulous way to get knowledge about people and about ideas.
It's funny to hear this where it's like, yes, this like obviously this is right, but connecting it to if you want to become more powerful, more successful, like you need to do this. Like I think that is a powerful point that we're all making here is just like this actually is necessary if you want to acquire more power.
Of course. I have a funny story about networking. So we have a thing at Stanford called View from the Top, in which these fancy people come in and give a talk. And one of the people came in and gave a talk and made my class instantly popular because he's an extraordinarily wealthy person. His name is Omid Kordestani. And so I reached out to him and I said, Omid, let's have breakfast. So I can understand, because during the thing, when somebody asked him what class was the most important in his success, he said mine. So I said, well, tell me your story. He said, well, I graduated from Stanford. I'm Persian in background, immigrant background, an engineer, HP, all the things that would make you kind of a nerd or something. He said, I went to work for a couple of startups that didn't do well. Then I found myself in the mid-90s at Netscape, the browser company, big deal. Anyway, Mark Andreessen.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I found myself at Netscape. In marketing and biz development, I was not making any progress. So one day I decided to take your class to an extreme. I decided to stop doing my job. So I said, when people gave you projects to do or assignments or tasks and you didn't do them, he said, it turns out that I spent my time not obviously at the bar, but at networking, first with people inside of Netscape. And it turns out if you're well connected to the senior leaders, they don't really care if you do your job or not. That's number one. Number two, he said, oftentimes I could find other people to do the work I was given. So instead of basically spending time doing my job, I networked first within Netscape. But Netscape was not that big a company. So after a while, he decided to go through, which is, by the way, his job anyway, in marketing and biz dev. He decided to basically drive through the Silicon Valley talking to people. And this is, the browsers are just beginning. Nobody knows what a browser is. Nobody knows what the internet is going to become. So he's having all these fabulous conversations. All right, so he now knows basically everybody. It's 1998, and a little tiny company decides, 10 engineers, typical Silicon Valley company, 10 engineers, all engineers. I have a friend who went to work for a company, run a company, had 26 people. He didn't have one sales and marketing person. Anyway, the company now has 10 engineers. They decide they need to hire their first business person. Being an analytically oriented company, they say, we're going to do this very analytically. We are basically going to ask everybody we can think of, and a few people we can't, give us a list of the best technically oriented business people that you know. And there is, of course, one name that appears on every list. It is Omid Kordestani, who becomes employee number 11 at Google and makes $2.5 billion.
Great success from networking. Well done. When people hear about networking, it just feels, like you said, like very cringe. Like I don't want to go to these networking events and try to like pretend to talk and care about people. Do you have any advice for just how to make networking feel less cringy?
One of the exercises I give my students is, I say, write a list of 10 people who, if you knew them and if they knew you, would be important for whatever you're trying to accomplish in your career. So maybe you're trying to get into biotech. You need to know 10 executives in biotech or whatever. Make a list of 10 people. Then for each person, figure out how you're going to meet them. And by the way, not necessarily at a networking event. Maybe you want to do what John Levy does, which is hold dinners, in which, by the way, the guests do the cooking, which is a very interesting idea. That, of course, taps into the IKEA effect. You always like something better if you participated in creating it. Maybe you want to hold dinners. Maybe you want to hold, maybe you want to try to reach out to them at lunch. Maybe you want to reach out to them and say, here's an article I think you'd be interested in. Here is somebody who I think you'd benefit from meeting. So recently, I'm not a particularly good networker, though I'm better, I guess, than some people. I recently met Esther Rachitsky. I'm sure I, killed her name. She's considered the grandmother of Silicon Valley. She's Susan Wojcicki's mother. And she is interested in depression, particularly depression among teenagers. And I said, you should know Leanne Williams, who's in the psychiatry and behavioral science department, who has done probably 300 articles on depression and has invented something which is called precision psychiatry. So I connected them to each other. I just sent her an email. I think you ought to know each other. They got together. I get credit for knowing people and connecting them, but I also benefit them. Leanne needs to raise money. Esther's got money. Esther needs to understand the cutting edge research in depression and the biomarkers of depression, which is what Leanne's specialty is. So they benefit. So this is not some icky thing. This is connecting people who benefit from being connected.
That touches on something you teach in the book is in your networking, you want to become a broker. You want to be central. That's kind of what you want to work on. Can you talk a bit about what that means?
Well, that means you want to connect people. So many people would benefit, and many groups would benefit from being connected, and they're not connected. What does a venture capitalist do? Connects people with ideas to people with money, and takes a fee for doing it. What does an investment banker do? Connects people trying to sell businesses or raise capital with people trying to buy businesses or who have capital. What's a real estate agent do? Connects buyers and sellers of houses. There are all kinds of examples where the person's entire job is connecting people. But even for the people whose job it isn't, you benefit from knowing people. The more people you know, the more things you know. As I sometimes say in my class, if leadership, management, call it what you will, is getting things done through other people, it seems like common sense that the more other people you know, the more you'll be able to get done.
Yeah. As someone that has become central to a lot of things in the product world and has built a large network as a result of this podcast newsletter, I can tell you 1,000% this creates a lot of opportunity and power, you could say, in quotes. So I've seen it happen. Third lesson, I guess you teach us to pursue weak ties. Talk a bit about what that means. What do you mean by that?
Well, the people to whom you are strongly tied, your family, your spouse, significant other, your friends, your work, the people who work with you at work will probably, because they are close to you, know the same things and the same people that you do. So to the extent that you build ties with people who are more different from you in every dimension, you are more likely to learn non-redundant information and come in contact with people that you don't already know. This again seems common sense. There's a lot of research behind it. Mark Granovetter, a sociologist who still teaches at Stanford, wrote a book entitled The Strength of Weak Ties. And basically, pardon me, he wrote an article called The Strength of Weak Ties. His book was called Getting a Job. And he did a study, I guess it was at that time in Boston. He did a study of job seekers in Massachusetts. And he looked at people who got jobs through applying to ads, and through more formal means. And then he looked at people who got jobs through referrals from their network. And it turns out, of course, the jobs that you get through your network referrals are much better jobs. And oftentimes the best jobs that people got were referred to them by people that were not particularly close to them, because they had a view, that's the word I was looking for, a view into the ecosystem of the Boston labor market that the other people didn't have because they weren't in the same place as the other people.
I love that lesson. Let's talk about another power, which is using your power. So when some people think of using your power builds more power, that's not intuitive. You talk about how it creates this like self-perpetuating growth of power the more you practice power. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So when you were given, it's interesting. My friend Deborah Grunfeld, who wrote a book called Acting with Power, talks a lot about people's ambivalence to power. So sometimes people are put in a job. Herminia Ibarra, who teaches now at London Business School, at one point taught at INSEAD, at one point taught at Harvard, has an article in the Harvard Business Review in which she talks about a woman in a drug company who gets a promotion and says to her colleagues, to whom she's now overseeing, that she's not sure why she got the job. She's not sure she deserves the job. Needless to say, she didn't do very well in this job because she got in her own way. But part of this is you are put in a position of power, you're put in a position of authority in order to make things happen. So to the extent you mobilize your resources and get things to happen, you will get more resources. People want to be associated with success. To the extent that you become successful, more people will want to work with you. To the extent that you get more stuff done, you'll get more promotions, more opportunities. I mean, nobody's going to give you a job to do if the last 5 jobs like that they gave you couldn't get done. So the more you're able to do, which oftentimes, of course, requires power and influence, the more you're able to do, the more you'll be asked to do, but better yet, the more resources you'll be given to help you get things done.
And I think interestingly, you teach that just showing that you have power creates more power. People see that you have this power and they start to follow your lead more, right? That's a part of this.
Yep. I just saw over the weekend the movie, the latest movie in the franchise of the Planet of the Apes. It's, when Jim Collins left Stanford, he gave me a book called Chimpanzee Politics, which is, of course, not based on the Planet of the Apes, but it's based upon the study of chimpanzees. We are the same. People are attracted to power. You know that.
Yep.
By the way, that will account for a lot of what is going to happen in the presidential election.
Let's save that for the end, because I think that's an interesting piece of your book of the connection to Trump. So let's save that for a bit. I think that'll be really interesting. Kind of along the same lines of the area we're just talking about. And another rule of power is to show up in a powerful fashion. So look powerful. Talk about what that looks like.
So my colleague at Berkeley, Dana Carney, Carney, is writing a book called Tell, which is about the importance of body language and how to master body language. There is some evidence that suggests we respond mostly to how people look, secondarily to how they sound, and by far the least important to the content of what they say. You can see this by turning on your TV and turning off the sound. Watch the presidential debates with the sound off. They'll be much better. I have another colleague in marketing by the name of Baba Shiv, who talks about people's freaky mind, or, the idea that we are, in fact, descended from primates, and that we are controlled in lots of ways by our emotions. And so we respond affectively to other people. We respond to how they look. There's evidence in economics that suggests tall people earn more salaries, earn more money, controlling for a bunch of things. Attractive people, as long as you're not too attractive, you earn more money. It's an optimal level of attractiveness. Because people respond subconsciously to how people look, how they sound, how they show up, how they present themselves. In my class, I take the example of Tony Hayward of BP, the Macondo oil spill, and Lloyd Blankfein, who was accused of shorting the securities that he was selling, which, by the way, Goldman did. And before I let them hear Tony or Lloyd, we'd show about 60 seconds. In Lloyd's case, 34 seconds, with no sound. And even if you did not know who these people were, and I asked you to make a bet, who's going to keep their job and who's going to lose it, you would know just from their physical appearance.
I love that.
And by the way, what Dana Carney will tell you, and what common sense will tell you, is that these are skills that can be mastered. Robert De Niro was not born Robert De Niro, in the sense of, acting skills are learned. How you show up, how you command a room. There's a guy named Regis McKenna, who is older than God, who's famous for running a very, very, very fancy public relations firm in the Silicon Valley. And his biggest contribution to life, as well as, by the way, to his personal wealth, is that he made Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs. When Steve Jobs began, Steve Jobs couldn't convince you to buy water if you were dying of thirst. He could not give a presentation to save his life. And Regis McKenna and his team took Steve Jobs under their wing and created Steve Jobs, a man who could sell anything to anybody. These are skills. This is not about personality. This is not about, undergoing some kind of cosmetic surgery or whatever. These are skills. Everything we've talked about, networking, showing up, all these things. These are skills that can be learned.
I have a list of some of the stuff you actually recommend for looking and appearing powerful. So I'll read a few and I'm curious what else comes to mind. So do not read from notes, make eye contact, keep it brief. You say that anger can be a signal of power because it's outside the norm. It's kind of breaking the rules. Don't apologize. It's kind of the opposite. More gestures, which is interesting. Open body posture, louder voice. Okay, I'm going to speak louder now. I like this. Okay. What else comes to mind as ways to appear powerful?
Invading people's personal space. So gentle touching, standing close to someone. We're not talking about sexual touching. We're talking a touch on the arm or the shoulder, shaking people's hands. That's a way of, I think, being more powerful. But you've covered the main ones. I mean, eye contact. One of the problems with Tony Hayward of BP is that he's been given a statement to read. You cannot read something in front of you and make eye contact at the same time. So he looks like he's scripted. He looks like he's insincere. So Jack Valenti, who I had the privilege of knowing, who for 38 years was the head of the Motion Picture Association of America, and typically rated one of the number one or number two most effective lobbyists in Washington, D.C., said to my class when he came to my class, which he did, I never appeared before Congress with notes. I wanted them to believe, which was, by the way, true, that I was in complete control and complete mastery of the material, and that I did not need notes or a bunch of assistants around me to help me, that I, as the head of the MPAA, understood the motion picture industry. And then he would give you a little aside about how it was the one industry that consistently had a budget surplus in trade. He would talk about how many jobs it created, and he had all this stuff at his fingertips. But basically, his command of the material made him more powerful. It's interesting. Jack Valenti was 5'2" tall. And he came, talked to my class, and the next class, I said to people, what are your reactions? What are your thoughts? And a woman raised her hand and said, he feels taller than he is. And I thought that was an assessment that was both true and insightful. When the 5'2" Jack Valenti appeared, because of his presence, because of his body language, because of his Texas drawl, because of how he moved on the stage, he felt bigger. You would not say he did not feel 5'2".
Let me read a couple more because this is a good example of stuff he did. Other ways to appear more powerful is more speaking time, longer gazing time, more disinhibited laughs. Is that just you laughing and feeling like you're just...
Well, the way humor. The famous author Salman Rushdie said, and I quote Salman Rushdie, it's a fabulous quote, if you can get people to laugh, you can tell them anything.
That's stand-up comedy is a great example of that. So again, I think here people might be hearing this and they're like, I don't want to be this person. I don't want to be talking all the time. I don't want to be pretending like open posture. Is the advice here just, you don't need to do all these things. Just know makes people more powerful. Don't necessarily judge people. Do some of these things maybe because it'll add to your power. How do you think about just people that are like turned off by this sort of thing?
It's a wonderful question. So I say to my class on the very first day of class that we will go through 4 stages. We will go through the stage of denial. It doesn't work in my culture. It doesn't work in my organization. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work in my religion, whatever. Then we'll go through anger. They get angry at me. How can you teach us this stuff? Then they'll go through sadness. I actually believe this and I'm depressed. And if we're successful, they will go through acceptance. And the process I have, again, I do not have the most popular class in Stanford Business School because I am good looking, because I'm the smartest person at Stanford or anything else. I am strategic about thinking about if I have someone who's going to come into this class, I have to get them from denial to acceptance in 10 weeks. And how are we going to do that? And the easiest way to do that, if I said, Lenny, I want you to become a better tennis player or a better rollerblader or a better ice skater, whatever, a better piano player in 10 weeks, what would we do? We'd have practice and coaching. And that's what I do in the class. Practice and coaching. I have executive coaches who work with the class, and I give them assignments that ask them to practice what they're learning. And therefore, by the end of the class, most people have made this transition because it is true. If you've never, I had a dinner the other night, this Israeli woman who's like, I've done amazing stuff. Amazing. It's just fabulous. And she said at the dinner, I would have never done this before taking your class. And the way you get them to do this is I don't say, Lenny, you're going to swim the English Channel tomorrow. If I want you to swim the English Channel, we're going to start by swimming in pools and make every day a little bit more challenging. That's what we do. I don't start by saying you're going to network like Keith Ferrazzi or John Levy, or you're not going to be as bold as Jason Calacanis, who, trust me, is extraordinarily bold. You're not going to necessarily do what I did. You're going to begin where you can begin and push yourself out of your comfort zone. Because, and again, this is common sense. There's also a ton of research behind it. If you always stay in your comfort zone, you will never do anything different or better than what you're currently doing. This is true. If I said to you, I want you to, at the end of 10 weeks, lift 100 pounds. I can't do that by on the last day saying lift 100 pounds. We have to work up to it. And that is, it's the same principle here. So don't do something that looks so off the wall or so out of character for you that you can't conceive doing it. Push yourself a little. Push yourself a little.
There's an interesting connection here to what some say is kind of the opposite of your class at Stanford, which is touchy-feely. We had Carol Robin on the podcast, and she has a framework, the 15% rule, where you push yourself 15% beyond your comfort zone, where it's just a little bit, but it's not too far. And it feels like you try to do a similar thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you begin by doing what you don't think you can do.
Let's spend a little more time here around the homework assignments and this kind of knowing doing gap that you talk about. So you shared a couple homework assignments you give already. Find 10 people, think of 10 people you want to meet that'll help you with your career, and then try to meet them. And then there's this, like, I guess my friend started a podcast. I don't know which homework assignment it was. What other homework assignments do you give?
So we begin, there's a literature on goal setting that says if you set goals, you're more likely to achieve them. This is, again, not some huge insight, but there's an enormous scientific literature about this. And so I begin, the very first homework assignment which is, by the way, on the very first day of class, why are you here? Why are you here? It is now the end of this class. What would success look like to you? What would you like to accomplish in our 10 weeks together? Second assignment, I give them a reading from the Power book, which is the book before 7 Rules, which talks about the 7 attributes of power. Go out and get people to rate you on these or rate yourself. Set for yourself a development plan. Energy, focus, being willing to tolerate conflict, all these qualities. What are you strong on? What are you weak on? What do you want to build during our time together? And how are you going to do it? So we begin with goal setting. One of the assignments I give them, which is the class that Jason comes to, what resources can you create? You're at Stanford Business School. Elite, fancy, Stanford. What can you do in your 10 weeks here? I have people who created awards. A woman who created an award. Gave it to Carly Kloss, the model. Got in trouble with the school. It turns out it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So, what can you do to create resources that will give you some leverage? That would be a third assignment. The networking is a fourth assignment. The acting with power, I show them the videos and I tell in advance of the class, and I tell them they need to become Tony Hayward. They need to do a better job, which is, by the way, a low bar, representing BP. And, give me a 60 to 90 second video and then share it with colleagues and get feedback on it. And then we're going to call on people in the class. In other words, for every idea, I try to think of something. And this is, by the way, this is all front loaded. And by the end of the class, we're not doing this so much. But I try to give them an exercise that causes them to actually take that idea and implement it. Find people, for branding. Write a personal brand statement. Get some feedback on it. Then write it again. How do you want to be known? Which is, by the way, useful to you because you're a second-year MBA. You're going to go in the damn job market. What do you want people to think about you? How do you want people to respond to you? How do you want to be known? So I basically take for every topic and have them do it. And then the coach, their coach, who is responsible for 23 of these people, give them feedback on this.
I could see how this makes a big impact on someone's life.
Yeah, and so at the end, I had a student a couple of years ago who said to me, it is not that I got more feedback and more useful feedback from your class than I did in any other class. I got more useful feedback in your class than I did on every other class I took combined.
I can see why. Let's talk about the last power. So we've talked through 6 already. We have only one more to go, which is maybe the one that probably upsets people most, which is that once you have power, people will forget what you did to get there. Talk about what that looks like. And is that a power, or is it more just like, this is what you should know about?
So, and I put in Rule 7 for the following reason. In spite of everything that you and I have been talking about, many people in a stage of, denial or something, say, I'm worried that if I do this, at the end, people believe that the world is homeostatic. It is not, that it's going to adjust, but whatever. At the end, I will be brought low. They have the myth of Icarus in their head. You fly too close to the sun, your wings are going to melt. You're going to be brought down. And so I try to convince them, partly through a lecture and partly through Rule 7 and some of the principles that I talk about in Rule 7, that in fact, life is not homeostatic at all. That life is actually self-fulfilling. If I believe you're powerful, you will become more powerful. If I believe you have no power, you will wind up with almost no power. And that therefore, it is all forgotten and forgiven. And I begin, but if not, I could begin with the story of the South Carolina senator who says nasty things about Trump and then Lindsey Graham and becomes Trump's biggest acolyte. And the New York Times, of course, is fascinated by this. How can you say all these horrible things about Trump and now be his, basically have your lips affixed to some part of his anatomy? And Lindsey's answer is, I want to be relevant. He's the president of the United States. If I may not, this goes back to the judgment. I may not like him, I may not this, that, the other thing. He's the president. If I want to get legislation passed, he, by the way, has taken over the Republican Party. If I want to get stuff done, I need to have him on my side. And like many narcissists and egomaniacs, it is not a good way to get him on your side by saying nasty things about him. So this is the pragmatics. People forget that Bill Gates stole the code on which Microsoft is built. People forget that Jeffrey Epstein, after being convicted of sex offenses, was still having dinners with members of the royal family and members of the New York media elite. People forget that Martha Stewart, who served time in jail, has a brand that's never been more valuable. People forget all this stuff. I still remember sitting in the office of someone whose name I won't use, but I'll use it instead. If somebody wanted to search it out, you could. So I am sitting in this guy's office, and he's, by the way, a Jewish man. He's got pictures of him with the Pope. He's got pictures of him with Ronald Reagan. He's got pictures of him with all these people. What is the secret? He, by the way, took a company into bankruptcy. People lost literally billions of dollars. He was fine. He lost money, but he walked away with about $700 million. It turns out $700 million makes you a big deal. Lives in the biggest house in Los Angeles, or one of the biggest houses in Los Angeles. I can't keep up with the construction of the big houses. People want to be close to money, power, and success. And they will overlook your flaws to be close to you.
Yeah. And again, you talk about this in the book. You're not describing how the world should work. This is just how it is. And this is how you can be successful in the world that we live in.
And by the way, this is how the world not only is, but how it was and how it will be. Because these ideas are not something that I sat down one day and made up or something. These ideas, everything that I talk about, including this last one, has social science and logic behind it. So you can explain not only what is, but why it is.
So let's talk about Trump for a bit. At the beginning of your book, you say that basically you were going to write a book about why Trump is so successful and what he's done so well. And your realization is no one's going to pay attention if, here's how to be like Trump. And essentially, if you think about all these rules, it's clear he is very good at all of these things.
That's correct. By the way, not because he read the book, but because he does it, through trial and error or something.
So when people hear that, they're like, I don't want to be Trump. I don't like how Trump is. I don't want to be seen that way. Do you have any thoughts on just how to make people feel comfortable following some of these powers and building power, knowing that, oh, wow, maybe he's the epitome of some of this stuff?
I will tell you a story. In 1993, a woman named Laura Esserman, who's a doctor, took my class. She claims publicly that this is the only class at Stanford for which she did all the reading. By the way, while she was getting her MBA at Stanford, she was having her first child and practicing medicine full time. Laura Esserman said to me one day, you have a case. You have cases on all these people doing evil things. Why don't you ever write a case about somebody doing good things? And of course, I wrote a case about her. So she comes to the class. Case was published in probably 2003, 2004. She comes to the class. And the students are, what is the right word? Hard on her? That would be a modest thing. The students eviscerate her because she is incredibly smart, incredibly well-intentioned, but she will not network. She says, I don't have time for schmoozing. She will not do almost any of the stuff that we talk about today. So she and her husband, Michael Endicott, two of my closest friends in the world, and I go out to lunch afterwards, and smoke is coming out of her ears. And she is pissed off, and this is a very accomplished woman and a very smart woman. And she's pissed. I said to her, Laura, you have boundless energy and boundless intelligence. You're a force of nature. Let me discuss something from the subject of physics. You are creating friction. With enough force, you can overcome the friction. If you reduce the friction, just think how much more you can accomplish. And she looked at me and changed. And I will tell you And I've said this publicly because I get to introduce her for all the awards she's won, and she's now won a ton of them, including Time Magazine 2016 list of 100 most influential people in the world. And I say to people, and I say it with pride, that of all the things I've done in my life, the thing I'm most proudest of, is creating Laura Esserman.
That is an awesome story and a really good way of thinking about this from a different angle.
Yeah, no, I mean, and she, so I said to Laura, I said, you want to make profound changes in the drug development process. You want to make profound changes in whether or not we learn from the treatments that are being given to people. You want to make profound changes in the connection between research and teaching, research and practice. You want to do all these things. If you're going to accomplish any of these things, you need to cross the bridge. And she hasn't crossed the bridge completely, and she and I joke about it. But she crossed the bridge a lot. And she has accomplished incredible things. She's won every cancer award that can be given. And by the way, she's won all these awards for the American Cancer Society, who she fought with. She's won these awards from the Susan Komen Foundation, who she fought with.
This is an incredible example of the opening quote to your book that I have here. If you want power to be used for good, more good people need to have power.
That's exactly right.
And I like it's like a quote attributed to me is how you.
Yeah, well, I don't remember saying it, but somebody said I said it, so I'll take credit for it. I said to Laura, you want to change medicine? Medicine is not going to change without the application of power and influence. If change was going to happen, it would have happened already. I mean, you have to take on entrenched interests. She has a whole thing, which we need not go into because it's pretty technical, on screening. She says everybody's getting a mammogram every year beyond a certain age, which is stupid for a variety of reasons. You can read. She was on the PBS NewsHour about this. This is what got her in trouble with the radiologists. The radiologists, of course, are selling screening. She said there's some people that need to be screened every month, and there's some people that need to be screened never because of their genetics. So, she wants custom tailored screening or precision screening. Anyway, she's fights everybody. Richard Blum, Dianne Feinstein's husband, both Dianne and Richard Blum are now deceased, was at a thing where she launched the Athena Project. The Athena Project, she is now, with her collaborators, collecting data on the diagnosis and treatment and outcome for 150,000 patients in the University of California healthcare system. So I'm supposed to give some opening talk to provide entertainment. And Dick Blum is there. Dick Blum, of course, is wealthy. He's Dianne Feinstein's husband. I said to him, Dick, how did Laura get you here? And I still remember, I think this is a quote in one of the books I wrote. He said to me, look, I've learned that at the end of the day, when Laura asks you to do something, you may say no, but at the end of the day, you're going to do it anyway. Save yourself the aggravation.
Oh, man. I feel like you're just endlessly full of good stories that we could just keep going on and on. Let me try to summarize the rules of power real quick and see if anything else emerges, and then have just a couple more questions. So the 7 rules of power: get out of your own way, break the rules, show up in a powerful fashion, create a powerful brand, network relentlessly, use your power, and understand that once you've acquired power, that what you did to get there will be forgiven, forgotten, or both. Let me ask you a question, maybe half in jest. You teach people how to acquire power. Why aren't you the most powerful man in the world?
That's a very good question, to which I have a very good answer.
Yes.
I have a colleague who's unfortunately now deceased by the name of James G. March, who was a very, very distinguished scholar. And James March said to me many, many years ago something which is completely true. You can have power or you can have autonomy, but you cannot have both. And I have chosen to live a life of freedom, autonomy. I mean, I could tell you stories that would bring tears to your eyes. I'll tell you one. We had a dean of the business school. His wife was dying of cancer, and she was projected to die in the fall. So the business school goes to him and says, we'll give you the fall off to be with your wife. She lived until June. It's now winter. You have responsibilities as the dean of the business school. You have to meet with alumni. You have to go around and raise money. You have to show up at events, university events. I do not necessarily think that is how he wanted to spend the winter and spring quarters. But that's what you have to do. When I wanted Jack Valenti to come to my class, I did not call Jack Valenti. I called Judy Dickey. Judy Dickey was his assistant. Judy Dickey controlled his schedule. I need Jack on such and such a day. He can't make it on that day. Fine, I can adjust the schedule. Can he make it on this day? When I wanted my friend Gary Lovin, who ran Harrah's and Caesars, and then was the number 2 executive at Aetna, I want him to come to my class. I called Reggie Kirk. I didn't call Gary Lovin. And that's all you need to know. I do not have an assistant who controls my schedule. I control my schedule. You will not find my Outlook calendar on any website or on any computer. I want autonomy. If I said to you, Lenny, I will give you $1 billion, or for that matter, $10 billion, if you can buy, if you can have last week again, you can't. You can't. Time goes in only one direction. I want control of my time. It is much more important to me than being a dean or an associate dean, a job that I was asked to do. I took one academic administrative job. I'm actually memorialized, believe it or not, in the Stanford record as having led, this is according to Mike Spence, who's the Nobel Prize winner, who was dean at the time, that I led the biggest and most successful transformation in the history of higher education. I did it. I did it once. I didn't like it. Life is too short. I want to do what I like.
That's a really profound point that I think people don't think about, is there's always this drive to acquire power. And your point is that there's a big downside, which is a lack of autonomy. Yeah, you think about I was trying to get Satya Nadella on the podcast, and I talked to his comms people, and they're like, every hour for the next 3 months is booked already. We know what he's doing. He's extremely booked. And, you think about the president, obviously, at Elon. I totally get what you're saying.
It's true. And I don't want to do that. And by the way, power also comes with enormous visibility. Donald Trump has done for 40 years what he's now being accused of doing. The tax stuff, all the stuff. He's been a grifter all his life. But when you become president, people are going to look at things that in the past they would not have looked at. You become president of a university, you're going to have scrutiny, as the president of Harvard learned and the president of Stanford learned, when they both had to resign, in one case because of plagiarism, in another case because of research misconduct. Power comes, you're going to be put under a microscope. People are going to look at what car you drive. They're going to look at who you go out with. They're going to look at how you spend your time. They're going to look at how you associate with. They're going to, you'll have no privacy. You'll have very little control over your life. Everybody will feel completely free to dissect you in public, in private, whatever. And you will face the trust dilemma. When you are rich and powerful, the question will be, are people praising you? Are people associating with you because of you or because of the position you hold?
Yeah. Do you spend any time, just to follow this thread, in your class convincing people stop being so obsessed with power, stop being so obsessed with becoming the top of everything? Is that a part of the class?
No.
Or is it just...
No.
No. Okay.
I teach them, they see we have a class on the price of power. I bring out Rudy Crew. Rudy Crew was the New York Schools chancellor under Rudy Giuliani. By the way, he tells many interesting stories about Rudy Giuliani, who did not just become the joke that he is overnight. He's worked hard to become that. But in any event, he will, and one year, because his daughter at that time was living in the Bay Area, when I asked him about, the effect of the positions he's held, head of Miami-Dade County Schools, head of New York City Schools, and Hillary ever won, he would have been Secretary of Education. Literally. There's Lauren in the room. He said to the class, Jeffrey asked me the question, why don't we let Lauren answer it? By the time she was finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. What is it like to be the child? What is it like to be the significant other of these people? And you know the answer to that. because you can see the suicides, the divorce rates. There is a price that not only you pay, but a price that your family pays.
I think that's a really good balance to the entire conversation. Maybe just as a last question, what if we give the audience a homework assignment to work on these power rules? What's something that you'd recommend someone try to do? I know it's probably dependent on what they're good at, not good at. What's something that they could do to start moving towards one of these rules?
So what I would say, and it comes from something that you talked about in our conversation at several times, which is, this is uncomfortable. Okay. So if I want you to do something uncomfortable, I can say, Lenny, go do this uncomfortable thing on your own. Or I can say, Lenny, I want you to do this with help, with social support. And so the first thing I would say to someone is, if you think this is uncomfortable, or if you think you're not skilled at this, get coaching. Get a coach. I send out regularly the list of the coaches who work with my online and on-campus classes. Happy to do it. And they're happy to have the business. Get a coach. Get a personal board of directors, like they talk about in the Wall Street Journal. In other words, get people who will give you advice, give you social support, and hold you accountable. That's the very first thing I would tell people to do. It is hard to do anything on your own. If I said to you, Lenny, I want you to start an extraordinarily successful podcast, and I want you to do it without any help, you would not be where you are today. So that simple principle, get help.
It feels like a part of rule number 1, get out of your own way.
Yep.
Ask for help. Jeffrey, I was nervous for this podcast because I thought this was going to be super uncomfortable stuff. It turns out all of this makes so much sense. And there's a really nice way of framing all of these rules. And there's so much reason to actually invest in these skills. So I really appreciate you putting in the time, being here, sharing all these stories and insights. Is there anything else you want to share as a kind of a final note or something to leave listeners with before we wrap up?
No.
We did it. We covered everything.
I'm happy. I'm happy. You're a very good interviewer, which is why your podcast is so successful. And
I appreciate that.
I'm happy to spend the time with you. And I hope whoever listens to this will, I hope, first of all, there'll be a lot of listeners, but I also hope that they will find it useful.
I know they will. 2 final questions. Where can folks find you online if they or find your book, I guess, if they want to learn more? And then how can listeners be useful to you?
So you can find my book anywhere where books are sold. Don't look at a physical bookstore because nobody carries it, including actually Stanford Bookstore. They run out of it if people kind of use it, but you can find it on Amazon, 7 Rules of Power, so that's how you can find the book. By the way, at the end of the book, I have a personal website, jeffreypfeffer.com. If you go to that website, you can find my course outline. You can take the course on your own if you want, or get somebody, or take it in a group of people. You can find research, you can find articles, you can find columns. You can follow me on LinkedIn, or I don't do Twitter anymore, but you can follow me on LinkedIn. So there are a lot of resources available for this. A company was once thinking of hiring me to give a talk in their organization. And the woman who wound up hiring me said, when I was discussing you and arguing that we should hire you for this presentation, one of the people in the committee said, is he a good presenter? And her answer, I love this, I remember this. Her answer was, he's a fabulous educator. My job is to educate. That is why I have done what I have done for now more than 50 years.
Holy moly. I didn't even realize that.
For more than 50 years, I have been in the business of education. Not just about power, but about many other things as well. But, so I'm in the education business. So I am happy to provide people with the resources, with the readings. The 7 Rules of Power is well footnoted. It talks at the end about, we could reach out for the coaches. You can go to the website and get the book. I think consistent with what you and I have talked about, if all you do is read, you're not going to make very much progress. You have to do it. You cannot learn tennis by reading about tennis or by watching a movie about Serena or Venus Williams. You have to actually get out on the court and do it.
which is a good plug for your other book, The Knowing Doing Gap, which actually helps you with the skill, which you can also find all your finer retailers. Jeffrey Pfeffer, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.